Today, we're going on a little tour through our digital past, inspired by a really thoughtful piece by Aydın Tiryaki. We're going to explore the soul of our software, and our journey has two main stops: a digital cemetery for the programs we've lost, and an antique shop for the ones that have somehow managed to endure.
So, let me just ask you this right off the bat. Have you ever felt a genuine pang of sadness when an app or a service you really loved just disappeared? That feeling, that digital nostalgia, is exactly what we're diving into. It's about more than just losing a tool, isn't it? It feels like losing a whole way of interacting with the world.
And that's because software is never just lines of code, right? Each program, each app, is really a philosophy. It's a vision for how we could connect or create or learn. And when one of them vanishes, a totally unique vision for the internet just vanishes right along with it.
Okay, our first stop is what the author brilliantly calls the Google Cemetery. Now, this isn't just a sad, long list of discontinued products. Try to think of it more as a memorial, a place for tools that, in their own way, just felt a little more human, a little more personal than what we have now.
First up, we have Picasa. Oh man, if you had a digital camera in the early 2000s, you almost certainly knew this one. For 14 years, it was the simple, super intuitive home for all our digital photos, and it lived right there on our own computers.
And its epitaph really captures a philosophy we've mostly lost. Picasa came from an era before everything was in the cloud. It was a time when your memories were local. It was a bastion of privacy because it lived on your machine, in your house. It trusted you to be the guardian.
Next, we visit a headstone that, I've got to say, still stings for a lot of internet old-timers: Google Reader. For 8 years, this thing was the undisputed king of RSS feeds. Just a clean, simple place where you could subscribe to all your favorite websites and blogs.
The author calls it a quiet librarian of the web, and that's just perfect. It didn't shout at you, it never served you ads, and it definitely never used an algorithm to decide what you should read. You were the curator. It simply and beautifully honored the sacred act of reading.
All right, next up is a really fascinating one: Google Goggles. Long before Google Lens, there was this pioneering visual search tool. But, and this is key, it had a completely different philosophy behind it.
So the crucial point here is that Goggles wasn't just a tool. It was kind of like a student. The author points out that it could learn the name of a mountain because a user taught it. It actually learned from human context. This idea of an AI gaining wisdom directly from us, yeah, we're going to come back to that.
And our final stop here in the cemetery is Hangouts. You know, for a while, it emerged from the absolute mess of Google's messaging apps to be the go-to for simple, direct communication.
Hangouts really only existed for one reason: to let people talk to each other. But as the digital world got more and more complicated with more features and confusing strategies, that simple mission just got lost. It basically represents the death of straightforwardness.
All right, let's leave the quiet of the cemetery behind. We're now stepping into the Google Antique Shop. This isn't a place for things that are dead, but for treasures that have actually endured, things that have gained value by resisting this disposable culture of modern tech.
And just look at what survived in here. You've got Blogger, described as a handcrafted desk for writers; Google Alerts, the faithful pocket watch that just works. You also see Google Groups, a quiet corner for focused discussions, and even FeedBurner, a sturdy old gear still turning in the background. They've all survived because they do one thing. They do it well, and they do it without a lot of fuss.
So what's the big lesson from our little tour of the cemetery and the antique shop? Well, this brings us to the absolute heart of the matter: the difference between being smart and being wise.
So on one side, you have the spirit of those buried tools, remember? They learned from human context, they valued privacy, they embraced simplicity. And on the other side, you have the trend in a lot of modern AI, which often lacks that kind of worldly wisdom. It favors algorithmic complexity and pushes us away from local control and into the anonymous cloud.
This leads us to what the author calls the teacher-user spirit. And this is the key idea of the whole thing. It's about a partnership where the AI is the student and you, the human, are the teacher. You're providing not just data, but context, meaning, and wisdom. This is the magic that we lost when Goggles was buried.
And here's the perfect example. A modern AI like Google Lens can look at a TV and tell you its make and model. Okay, that's smart. But it completely, totally misses the fact that a cinematic masterpiece is playing on the screen. It identifies the object, but it misses the art, the meaning, the context. That's the lack of wisdom right there.
So that's the crucial point, isn't it? We have built these unbelievably powerful, data-driven systems that are, without a doubt, smart. But have we forgotten how to build for wisdom? For an understanding that goes deeper than just simple identification?
You know, ultimately, this whole journey through the cemetery and the antique shop, it's not really just about Google products. It's more like a ledger, a record of our ongoing struggle to build technology that actually enhances our humanity, instead of just optimizing it away. And that leaves us with a final, really big question to think about. As we all race to build the next, smarter, more powerful AI, what essential parts of that old, human-centric wisdom are we choosing to bury in the cemetery? What are we leaving behind?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we're doing something a little different, a conceptual journey. We're not digging through quarterly earnings reports or market shares. Instead, we're walking through a really unique inventory of digital tools, and they're categorized not by money, but by the spirit they embodied.
It's almost like a digital archaeology dig. The source we're using, a digital inventory. The Google Cemetery and the Antique Shop frames this whole thing as a kind of philosophical ledger, a record of our struggle to stay human, to stay contextual, in a world that's just getting more and more digitized.
Exactly. So we're going to explore this conceptual Google Cemetery where all these lost digital ideas are buried. And then we're going to step into an antique shop where some of the old tools have actually gotten more valuable over time. Our mission here is to really pull out the most insightful bits about the trade-offs we've all been making, maybe without even realizing it.
And we'll get into why some platforms that, prioritize things like privacy and depuration just disappeared, while others, often the simpler, quieter ones, have managed to survive. Really because they resisted this modern pressure to just constantly churn out content. It's a deep dive into how digital culture has really evolved.
Okay, let's start this journey. Let's begin in the quiet grounds of the Google Cemetery. The authors say these headstones hold, well, more than just lines of code.
They hold visions of what the internet could have been, and the language they use is really deliberate, it's emotional. These tools, they sort of represent a time when the digital world felt a bit more personal, less centralized. They remind us that the early internet allowed for human decisions, not just algorithmic commands.
Right, human scale decisions. And if we're talking about that, we have to start with Picasa. It ran from 2002 to 2016. The source calls it the faithful guardian of memories. But what did its death really symbolize?
Picaso's end, according to the source, was the loss of the last bastion of privacy and local order. And that's a really crucial idea. When you used Picasso, your photos were managed, on your own desk. The files were on your computer. You decided how to organize them. You were in charge of the security.
So when Picasso was retired and everyone got pushed towards, Google Photos, what was the real trade-off? Because the argument is always that the cloud is just so much more convenient.
Oh, it is. It's absolutely more efficient. But the trade-off was agency for convenience. You stopped owning the management process. And you started, as the source puts it, entrusting them to the unknown clouds in the sky. You traded that absolute control you had for endless storage and instant sharing. And that makes your entire archive of memories dependent on some corporation's policies. The loss is control.
That puts a completely different frame on it. Okay, let's move on to one that, people still talk about this one. Google Reader, 2005 to 2013. It's described so poetically here as the quiet librarian of the web.
And what made the librarian quiet was the technology, RSS. You, the user, you actively subscribed to information from sources you picked, and Reader just brought it all to you, silently, and crucially, with no ads, no engagement bait.
For our listeners, for anyone who wants to gain knowledge thoroughly but without being overwhelmed, Reader sounds like it was essential. How does its death show a kind of, a negative shift in how we consume information?
Reader was basically buried along with an era where reading was still a sacred act that you directed yourself. Today, our feeds are run by these mysterious algorithms that just want to keep us scrolling. They push engagement, controversy. Reader's whole point was to efficiently give you what you chose to read. It was a tool for intellectual efficiency. And when it disappeared, that was the moment, the authors argue, that algorithms began to dictate our thoughts.
A shift from curation to compulsion. That's big. Now let's talk about a piece of tech whose loss really informs the final point of this whole inventory. Google Goggles, 2009 to 2018. The source doesn't frame it as a smart algorithm, but as a wise child. It even calls it a student.
Yeah, that human element is the most tragic part of goggles. It wasn't just identifying images, it had a learning philosophy. I mean, think about the specific story they share. It says goggles never forgot the names of the mountains and an old house that a user once taught it from a terrace.
Wait, I need to pause on that. So you're saying the human user wasn't just typing in a search query. They were actually teacher, imparting context.
Exactly. That is the teacher-user dynamic. That's the core of it. When Goggles learned the name of that house, it wasn't just logging a data point. It was retaining a specific human connection to that place. It understood the context of that moment shared with its user.
But wouldn't something like Google Lens today be way more powerful? It has access to so much more data. Why mourn the less capable goggles?
Because Lens is built for instant generic identification. It uses massive data sets. Goggles was built for retention and relationship. And here's the key takeaway from the inventory. When Google buried Goggles, the authors say they also buried the idea of context, the possibility of building actual wisdom into AI. It was a tool for shared understanding, where modern tools are just for immediate answers. And that difference between smart and wise, everything else hinges on that.
It really gives the cemetery a philosophical weight, doesn't it? Okay, before we move on, there's a quick mention of tools that died for other reasons, like internal corporate politics.
Hangouts.
Right, Hangouts. The last ambassador of simplicity just wanted to talk, but it retired here exhausted by the weight of strategic indecision. It's a perfect example of how sometimes these things die just because of internal business decisions, the constant battle between different messaging apps. A simple, good tool just gets extinguished. And that concludes our tour of the cemetery. It sounds like the theme is the loss of, personal control, deep curation, and that critical human context. All right, let's shift gears. Let's step out of the cemetery and into the Google Antique Shop, where things have survived.
And these survivors are so fascinating because they resist that scroll and forget culture we live in now. They aren't flashy, but they have this digital resilience. They do one thing well, and that function hasn't really been replaced by the modern algorithm.
And leading the pack here is Blogger, 2003, and believe it or not, still going. The Force describes it as the handcrafted wooden desk, still bearing the ink stains of thousands of handwritten thoughts.
The endurance of Blogger is powerful because of the contrast with modern social media. Blogger is permanent, it's static. The source says here, the speed of the algorithm stops. Only the soul of the written word breathes. It's designed for publishing, not boosting, for archiving, not for engagement.
So if the antique shop is about resistance, Blogger is resisting the need for speed. Its value is in its slowness.
Precisely. For a learner, that slow, archived nature is a huge benefit. It allows for intentional writing that doesn't have to fight for attention. It's a desk for thoughts that need time to settle, not posts designed to go viral today and be forgotten tomorrow.
That's a profound contrast with what happened to Reader. Okay, let's look at two others that are defined by their sheer utility: Google Alerts and Google Groups.
Alerts is like a dedicated assistant, the faithful pocket watch that shows up every morning with silent reliability.
Yeah.
It's focused, it's dependable, it doesn't distract you, it doesn't change its interface every 6 months, it just works.
And Groups. That feels almost ancient in the age of Discord and Slack. It's called the dignified corner of old neighborhood councils. How does a relic like that still have value?
It maintains its gravity and historical weight because it's far away from all the noise of modern forums. It's an archived, threaded discussion format, often for really niche topics. Think like academic discussions or deep technical support threads. For a learner, these groups are a goldmine, a historical record of debate and problem solving that today's platforms just can't offer. They survive because they're great at being reliable for a niche, not because they're flashy.
So they're not trying to be for everyone. They're about deep knowledge for a few. And finally, we have the invisible workhorse of the shop, FeedBurner.
FeedBurner is just essential infrastructure. Since we talked about Reader, we should mention FeedBurner helps manage those RSS feeds. It's the sturdy, stainless gear of the RSS world. It's not in the spotlight, but it keeps transporting information through the internet. And it just confirms that value isn't always about being visible.
So we've seen the loss of human context in the cemetery and the survival of permanence and reliability in the antique shop. What does this whole inventory tell us when you put the two halves together?
This is where the authors really deliver their final critical point about where we are with digital tools now, especially AI. The whole journey points to this huge distinction that we're mostly ignoring in tech design today. The difference between being merely smart and being truly wise.
And they make that concrete with the television screen scenario. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so the scenario is this. A modern AI vision tool, like an advanced Google Lens, looks at a TV screen, and it correctly, instantly identifies the brand of the TV, the model number, the screen specs. But it completely misses the masterpiece playing on the screen, say, a historic film, because it's just prioritizing the physical object over the cultural context.
So it has all the data, but it lacks the perspective. Why is that, based on our inventory?
Because we buried that teacher-user spirit with goggles. Modern AI is trained to identify surface-level data, the brand of the TV. It lacks the contextual knowledge, the wisdom to understand that the content on the screen is probably infinitely more important than the screen itself.
So modern AI can seem incredibly smart because it can process tons of surface information, but it's missing that deeper relational understanding that something like goggles was just starting to build with a human.
Exactly. The inventory is a ledger of the trade-offs we've made. We traded the pursuit of profound connection, that moment on the terrace with goggles and the mountains, and sincere writing, like a blogger post, for sheer speed and mass-produced superficial data. The profound gets sacrificed for the instantaneous.
That's a heavy conclusion. This whole deep dive, it's taken us from the privacy of Picasa through the curated world of Reader, and now it leaves us on this battleground of wisdom versus just being smart.
It's a mirror, really, a mirror reflecting our own digital priorities. We saw that tools that focus on permanence, reliability, conscious choice like Blogger and Groups, they endure. But the tools that attempted a more nuanced, human-centric approach, they often died because of this massive shift towards speed and centralization.
We've established that this whole inventory shows we kind of buried context and wisdom in exchange for smart but superficial results. And that really forces you to think about how you pursue knowledge today.
And that's the question we want to leave you with. If the soul of the written word, that deep human context we valued in tools like Blogger, is always being pushed aside for instant answers, what specific kind of knowledge or critical insight might you be sacrificing today by prioritizing that sheer speed over depth, reliability, and that human-imparted wisdom?
A vital question to consider as you navigate your own digital world. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep exploring those themes.